بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم صلى الله وسلم عليك يا سيدي ومولاي يا رسول الله صلى الله وسلم عليك يا سيدي ومولاي وابن مولاي يا أبا عبد الله فاز من اعتصم بحبلكم وأمن من لجأ إليكم يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز فوزا عظيما. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد، والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله، بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The ayah of the Holy Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu attaqullaha, it says, addressing the believers, those who have iman embedded within their hearts. It says, those of you who believe, number one, have taqwa, taqullaha, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in such a way that you recognize His presence in every movement that you make in this world. Number one. Number two, وَكُونُوا مَعَ الصَّادِقِينَ, and be amongst those who are truthful. And it's rational that we should be amongst those who are truthful rather than being with those who, for example, represent falsehood, represent batil. And what's interesting is when we examine the saga or the epic battle of Karbala, we see that it was a perfect embodiment between a battle between truth and falsehood. And it's an interesting discussion, especially when we dissect the whole concept of companionship, of the element or the discussion surrounding the ashab. And not just necessarily the ashab of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, but also in understanding the caliber and the quality, the spiritual quality of the ashab of Imam Hussein salawatullahi wasalamu alayhi. And you find that when we examine the history of Karbala, what's interesting is that you'll have a number of different opinions that have been introduced, explaining to us that the shuhada were different in terms of the variation in numbers. So for example, we have the famous narration that says, which has been quoted by Abu Mikhnaf, who narrates from the Haq. He says that the number of martyrs in Karbala was 72 in total. You find, for example, Hussein ibn Abd al-Rahman, who narrates from Sa'd ibn Ubaidah, he said no, there weren't 72, rather there were 100 people. You find, for example, At-Tabari in his Tariq, when he quotes Abi Mikhnaf, he says that there were, Abi Mikhnaf shares an opinion narrated by Zayd ibn Ali alayhi salam, upon which he says that there were 300 people. So first opinion 72, the second opinion 100, the third opinion 300. Then you have other opinions that say no, there were 70 and not 72. Al-Mas'udi, for example, he says there were 61. Al-Khawarizmi says there were 114. Sibt ibn Jawzi says there were 145. And so you find, for example, Ibn Hajar al-Haythami in his research, he says that there were 80 or just about 80 individuals, or just more than 80 individuals. And so when you come across this understanding that there are a number of reports explaining to us that there are a number of different a number of reports explaining to us that the number of companions of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam varied from 72 all the way to 300. And so you find that those who, for example, may not be familiar with history may come forward and say, well, why do we have such great discrepancies in our sources or within the sources of our brothers? Does that mean that, for example, the history of Karbala is something that perhaps is exaggerated, or perhaps it never happened? No. You find that the event of Karbala is something that is absolutely accepted by many, by in fact all of the historians. In fact, to such an extent that you have those who support Ibn Ziyad, for example, go about finding excuses to justify their actions. And of course, you find that our scholars came forward and said, the likes of Ayatollah Mahdi Shamsuddin, he came forward in his research, and he's done a phenomenal research in terms of this particular area, as to why there are so many different variations of the number of the ashab of the Holy Imam alayhi salam. He says that no, we don't focus on what happened in Karbala on the 10th day of Muharram. On the day of Ashura, we come forward and say that there were 72 men who were slaughtered and butchered. And that's something that is accepted by the earlier historians. And the earlier historians have a sense of a priority when it comes to their understanding of what happened in Karbala. He said, but the other variations in history, the other narrations that explain that no, perhaps it could be 100, perhaps 150, perhaps 300, this is taking into consideration the whole movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam from the very beginning when he leaves Medina until the very end when he is slaughtered on the 10th of Muharram. So when you expand the time slot from the moment he leaves Medina all the way to the 10th of Muharram, you find that there are many people who are also killed, who also suffer the same fate as Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, except that they were not there on the 10th of Muharram alongside him in the plains of Karbala. So you find, for example, Mahdi Shamsuddin comes forward, a Sheikh Marhum, comes forward and he says that there were 11 who died before Ashura. There were 11 individuals who were slaughtered before Ashura, the likes of, for example, Muslim ibn Aqil, Hani ibn Urwa, the likes of, for example, the two sons of Muslim ibn Aqil, and so on and so forth. There were 8 who were injured in the battle of Ashura, in the battle of Karbala, but then because of their wounds, they died later on. According to his history or historical understanding, he said there were many who died in Kufa after the event of Karbala, when Ibn Ziyad delivered a sermon. They stood in opposition against Ibn Ziyad. And when they stood in opposition against Ibn Ziyad executed them. Some were killed when they heard the Imam's killing. So when they heard about the news of Karbala, they stood against Ibn Ziyad and they opposed him and they were killed as well. So you find that all of these people were in one way or another associated with the movement of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, except that they were not there alongside him. And so therefore when we engage in the discussion surrounding the quality, the spiritual quality of the ashab of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, there's a very famous statement that he makes on the night of Ashura. It's a statement that has baffled the minds of the ulama and has triggered a number of discussions within our sources, within our books. You find Imam comes forward, and on the night of Ashura, what he does is he sits down with all of his companions and he tells them, says, look, tomorrow our blood will be spilt in these lands, and there is no escape from that. If any of you wish to leave, then you have the free choice to leave. You have the will to do so. I am not forcing any of you to be here alongside me. He takes the candles, he extinguishes the light, and he relits the candle moments later. When he relits the candle moments later, he sees that none of his companions moved from their seats. In fact, you had the likes of Muslim ibn Awsaj, The likes of Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, who came forward and said, Ya Abu Abdullah, we will be with you until the very end. Even if they were to cut us into 1,000 pieces, we would still stand alongside you. Even if we were to be brought back to life, just to be cut into 1,000 more pieces, we will never abandon your position. We will not abandon your, number one, maqam, and number two, our support to you. And that's something fundamental, because now the Imam makes a statement. The Imam turns around and he says, Amma ba'd, inni la a'lamu ashaban awfa wa la khayran min ashabi. He says, Wallah, I have never seen a group of companions who are far more loyal and far more better than my companions. These are very profound, powerful statements that the Imam is making. And then he says, وَلَا أَهْلَ بَيْتِ أَبَرُّ وَلَا أُوصَلُ مِنْ أَهْلِ بَيْتِ. And I have not seen the members of my household to be better than any other members of any other household. So now a question was raised. If the Imam ﷺ says this, that my companions are far greater in terms of the quality and they are far more loyal, does that mean that they are better than the ashab of Rasulullah? Does that mean that they are better than the ashab of Amir al-Mu'mineen, as well as the ashab of Imam al-Hassan, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhim ajma'een? Absolutely. How? The Quran, for example, praises the ashab, especially during when? During the Battle of Badr. In the Battle of Badr, the ayat of the Holy Quran begins to what? Begins to praise the Muslimin that were there fighting against the Mushrikeen. The Muslims, 313 in number, standing alongside the Holy Prophet of Islam. Then you had, for example, they were opposed by an army 3 times as much. And so from this perspective, a question was raised. And it's something that has been discussed amongst the scholars. Were the ashab of Abu Abdullah in Karbala greater and more loyal than the ashab of Rasulullah in Badr, knowing that there is an ayah of the Holy Quran that praises the ashab of Badr? We say absolutely. And the reason why that is because the people of Karbala, there is a vast difference between them and those who were present on the day of Badr. One of the differences is that if you were to compare the people of Badr, the companions of Badr, you have to understand the people of Badr that were there, they were simple-minded individuals. They were new to the religion of Islam. They didn't know anything about the religion of Islam or the Sharia. They migrated to the city of Medina. They had just settled into the city of Medina, and all of a sudden, abruptly, they had to go for war. And they had to defend themselves and defend the message of Islam. As for the rulings of Salah, for example, the rulings of Sawm and Hajj and Zakat and Khums, they had no information about these intricacies of the Sharia. So you find that the individuals in the Battle of Badr, the companions of Badr, they were like children who had just joined the religion of Islam. They did not have the intricate knowledge of the Quran, of Tawheed, of Nabuwah, or even of Al-Ma'ad, like a child who knows nothing. A child is loyal to you. Yes, when you look at a child, he is loyal towards their parents. Wherever the parent goes, the child follows unconditionally. This is how the companions of the Holy Prophet were in the beginning. Compare that child to a man of a good age, a man who has become an adult, a man who, for example, is able to understand. There's a massive difference between the two. When you look towards the companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, leading towards the 10th of Muharram, many a times when the Imam would deliver sermons, he would make it clear, explicitly clear, that martyrdom is part of this movement. You will most definitely see yourselves leaving this world if you join me. So the Imam announces many a times that Shahadat is part and parcel of his movement. The companions that were sitting there alongside the Imam alayhi salam, each and every one of them knew that in the morning of the 10th of Muharram, they will have to give their lives. Now imagine being a companion of the Holy Prophet. Imagine this. You have been given the news that tomorrow we will be marching towards the lands of Badr to fight the Mushrikeen. Now, if I was a companion who had just been given this news, I know that tomorrow I have to go and defend myself. But there is a 50-50 chance that I will survive the Battle of Badr or I will be killed. That piece of information is unknown to me. I wish that I survived the Battle of Badr. But if I have become a shaheed, then I pray that my ibadah is accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a win-win situation for me as an individual. But you find the ashab of Imam alayhi salam, they didn't walk into the Battle of Karbala knowing that they will survive it. The Imam made it very clear to them. And the Imam made it explicitly clear to them that this is a movement and there is no survival after this movement. If you join me on the 10th of Muharram, you will most definitely be killed. You will leave your businesses behind, you will leave your homes behind, you will leave your children, your daughters, your sons, your wives, your family, every single thing that you own in this world, you will leave it behind. They had absolute certainty that death is most definitely part or written for them on the 10th of Muharram. And so you find even then, having this piece of information, they stood alongside Abu Abdullah alayhi salam and they did not waver the position. They did not, for example, move away and escape in the middle of the night. So when you understand the loyalty of the Imam alayhi salam, you realize that their motivation, you realize that their loyalty towards the Imam alayhi salam was absolutely firm. Their sincerity was seen in their actions as it was seen in their hearts. Their commitment was there in their actions as well as in their hearts. It's because you find that they fought and they defended the message of Islam with sincerity, with ikhlas. You find, for example, that when you compare the companions of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam to the companions of Rasulullah, the Holy Prophet of Islam had a major challenge during his movement. Many of his companions, Sahih, they supported him in the battles. You had, for example, the Battle of Badr. When the Battle of Badr takes place, you find that many of the companions, when they engaged in the Battle of Uhud, their intentions changed. Their intentions weren't like the Battle of Badr. So it's unfair to make a blank statement to say that the companions in the Battle of Badr are, for example, the best of companions. Yes? Because according to the Islamic understanding, according to the Islamic narrative, fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, according to the understanding of Rasulullah, is seen as what? Jihad al-Asghar. They say that after the Battle of Uhud, when they came back, Rasulullah said, congratulations, you have just come back from Jihad al-Asghar. Upon which they said, what is Jihad al-Akbar? Upon which Rasulullah says, Jihad al-Akbar is that you maintain taqwa, that you maintain iman within your hearts. Jihad al-Asghar is you fighting physically to safeguard the religion of Islam. Whereas Jihad al-Akbar is when you fight with your nafs, where you fight with your desires to try and maintain iman within your hearts. It's easy for a person to go and give his life, for example, in the Battle of Badr, but it is far more difficult for them to come back after the Battle of Badr and to maintain that belief that they so truly hold in their hearts. And the Battle of Uhud, that same level of sincerity wasn't there. They weren't fighting, for example, a group from amongst them. They weren't fighting to preserve the message of Islam. When they saw that the Muslims were winning, and when they saw all of that war booty that was there underneath the mountain of Uhud, what did they do? They ran towards that war booty. And that was what caused the Muslims to lose in the Battle of Badr. So you find, and this is very much represented and reverberated in the history of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. When the Imam alayhi salam leaves the city of Medina, the city of his grandfather Rasulullah, he marches or he goes towards the city of Mecca with the intention to perform Hajj. When he leaves the city of Medina, he makes an announcement that he will lead a revolution and uprising against Yazid ibn Muawiyah. When the people listen to his sermons, that the Imam now has the intention to lead against Yazid ibn Muawiyah, many of them join his army. They get to the city of Mecca. He is on the verge of performing Hajj. he sees that there is no safety for him even in the lands of Masjid al-Haram, he makes an announcement. I am heading towards the city of Kufa, and I will gather and conjure the people and lead an uprising against Yazid ibn Muawiyah. We spoke about this when we spoke about the people of Kufa, yes? That the reason why Abu Abdullah alayhi salam directed himself towards the city of Kufa was to fight Yazid ibn Muawiyah. And he knew that the people of Kufa were Shi'as in which dimension? Political Shi'as. They knew, the people of Kufa knew that the Imam alayhi salam is far better of a leader from a political dimension, not wila'i dimension, not in religious affairs, in political affairs. They knew and they submitted to the fact that the Imam is a far greater leader than the Banu Umayyah. So he knew that that support will be given by the people of Kufa, so he heads towards the city of Kufa. When he heads towards the city of Kufa, there are many stations that the Imam stops and he announces, he delivers sermon, left, right and center. These are my intentions. I am heading towards the city of Kufa and I expect the people to join me and we will lead an uprising together against Yazid ibn Muawiyah. When Muslim ibn Aqil is executed, when Hani ibn Urwa is executed, remember, at this moment in time, there are hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of people who have joined the camp of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. According to some narrations, nearly 1,000 individuals have already joined the camp of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. When the news of the execution of Muslim and Hani ibn Urwa reaches the camps of Abu Abdullah, slowly the people begin to dissipate. Slowly the people begin to turn around and walk away and they abandon the camp of Abu Abdullah. Why? Because they realized one thing. They realized that the people of Kufa will not show support to Abu Abdullah. If they are willing to kill Muslim Aqil and drag his body in the streets, it means the people of Kufa have already chosen a side. And that side is not alongside Abu Abdullah, it is with Ibn Ziyad. So when they realized that the Imam alayhi salam has no power against Yazid ibn Muawiyah, that there is no force, that there is no army that he can work with, slowly they began to abandon him. They joined him with which intention? They joined him with the intention that, look, if we get together with the city of Kufa, we will be able to destroy the Bani Umayyah. When the hukumat of Imam Hussein is then established, we will be seen as those who helped Abu Abdullah, and he will reward us in return. We will get positions in the government. We will get, for example, more stipends from Bayt al-Mal. We will be given the gold and the silver, the dirhams and the dinars. But when they saw that the people of Kufa did not show loyalty or support to the Imam, they abandoned the Imam alayhi salam. And that's something crucial to bear in mind, that when you look at Karbala, those individuals that were there, that gave their lives for Abu Abdullah, they were only 72 in number. Out of the entire Muslim Ummah, from those Muslims in Sham and Syria, from those Muslims in Kufa, in, for example, Iraq and Basra, from those Kufas that were in Hijaz, Mecca, Medina, Ta'if, from all of those Muslims that were in Yemen and northern Egypt. Because remember, the Khulafa that came before Amir al-Mu'mineen, they engaged in the expansion of the religion of Islam. Certain empires came towards the religion of Islam. So the Muslims were there, great in number, but only 72 out of the entire Muslim Ummah were there alongside Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. And for that we say that these 72 individuals were handpicked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were not there. They were not there out of chance. They were not there, for example, out of coincidence. They were chosen by Allah to be alongside Abu Abdullah. You look at, for example, the likes of A'zam ibn Umayy from the city of Basra. You, for example, look at Hajjaj ibn Badr as-Sa'idi from the residences of Basra. You look at, for example, Amir ibn Muslim from the residences of Basra. There are a handful of people from the city of Basra. You look at, for example, the Kufans. We spoke about the Kufans the other night, and we said, and we discussed the entire discussion in a bit more in fairly good detail, Who killed Abu Abdullah alayhi salam? Usually you find the Ahl Salaf or the Wahhabiyin, they come forward and they say that we Shias killed Abu Abdullah, because the Kufans were those who killed Abu Abdullah. But then when you look at the army, or when you look at, for example, the companions of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, at least 90% of them were Kufans themselves. So that's an oxymoron right there. How can the Kufans kill Abu Abdullah alayhi salam when 90% of the army of Abu Abdullah were Kufans? So you find, for example, Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyah, the general of the Muslim army, of the Kufan army. Yes, a man with a reputation. You look at, for example, Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, we recited his Musibah last night. You look at, for example, Abdul Rahman ibn Mas'ud. All of these were chosen, handpicked by Allah to represent Abu Abdullah on the 10th of Muharram. When Hur joins the camp of Abu Abdullah, he didn't join alone. He wasn't alone. When Hur enters the camps of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, they say 32 of his close companions came with him, alongside him. 32 companions who were there standing in opposition with Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, they walked with Hur towards the camps of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. So when you look at the history of Karbala, looking specifically at the individuals that were involved in Karbala, we say that there were three types of individuals. The first were those who joined the camp of Abu Abdullah. The second were those who joined the camps of Ibn Ziyad. But then the third were those who chose neither this camp or that camp. Like whom? You have the example of Harthama. They say Harthama was the companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. He was an old man in the time of Karbala. He narrates this. He says that we were alongside Amir al-Mu'mineen in the Battle of Siffin. We were alongside the Imam in the Battle of Siffin. When the battle was over, we were now going back to the city of Kufa. When we went back to the cities of Kufa, we passed over the lands of Karbala. A famous narration that is mentioned by Sheikh al-Saduq. What does he say? He says that when the Imam came back from the Battle of Siffin, he begins to cry. He reaches the lands of Karbala and he cries. And he says to Ibn Abbas, Ibn Abbas, do you know what land this is? And Ibn Abbas says, I do not know. Upon which the Imam says, if you know what land this is, you would cry the way I am crying. So Harthama narrates, he says that when we passed the lands of Karbala, the Imam alayhi salam picked up a handful of dirt. The Imam, when he picked up a handful of dirt, he began to smell. He began to smell the fragrance of this dirt. And he said, Wa haluka ayyuhat turba. He said, what is your state, O turba? May God, may Allah praise this clay and this sand. Because a group of people will be slain in this land. And on the day of judgment, these individuals who are slaughtered in this land, they will be raised and brought back to life without any hisab. No accounting whatsoever. No human being, according to the Quranic language, no human being will be able to enter the gates of paradise without judgment, without going through the whole procedure of hisab. Every single human being will have all of his actions accounted for. However, those who were slain on the days of Karbala, on the days of Muharram, on the day of Ashura, they will be raised without hisab and they will enter the kingdoms of Jannah without hisab, because their hisab was accounted for in dunya. Yes, this is the power and the position of these personalities. They have surpassed the levels of selfishness and they have gone beyond their selfish desires. They gave everything they had for the sake of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. When Harthama hears the words of the Imam alayhi salam, he comes back to his wife. When he comes back to the city of Kufa, he comes to his wife and he narrates this. He said, I found it so odd. It was so baffling. How can a group of people be raised without accounting, when the Quran tells us that not a single soul will be excused from accounting? You find the wife of Harthama, she was indeed a Shia, and she believed in the wilayah of the Imam alayhi salam. So she comes to him, she says, Ya Harthama, I believe him and I believe in his words. And she says that I believe in whatever he says because he represents the haqq, and what he says will most definitely transpire. Harthama refused to believe until he found himself standing alongside the army of Ibn Ziyad 20 years later. 20 years later, he finds himself once again standing in the plains of Karbala alongside Umar ibn Sa'ad. Then all of a sudden he remembers. He says, hold on a second, I've been here in these lands. These trees, the Furat, all of it looks very, very familiar. And then he remembers what Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam said. Then he understands the intentions of Umar ibn Sa'ad. Then he quickly abandons his post and he enters the presence of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Now his wife reports. He tells his wife, he said, I reached the tent of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam and I sought an audience with him. The Imam looked at me, he looked at my face and he said to me, Ya Harthama, are you a friend or are you a foe? Harthama replies, he says, I'm neither. I'm not a friend nor a foe. He says, I'm not someone who will support you, nor am I someone who will oppose you. Then Imam alayhi salam says, Ya Harthama, you're free to go. No one's forcing you to be here. But make sure that when you flee these lands, you are not able to hear the cries of my children. And you're not able to hear my cries. Because if you hear my cries and you still refuse to support, then there is no peace for you on the day of judgment. You will be accounted for that. And you will be rewarded with that action by the fires of hell. And so Harthama quickly abandons his post and he runs away. So the third type of people that were there at Karbala were those who neither helped Abu Abdullah alayhi salam or those who opposed him. They abandoned their positions and they fled from the lands of Karbala. Now, you find when the discussion is spoken about the companions of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, there's a very interesting discussion because there are those from amongst the enemies of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, when they came towards the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad, the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad, the Kufids, you find, for example, the likes of one person in particular, when the people of Kufa, when the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad were complaining about the position, the bravery and the strength of the army of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, this particular person came forward and he said to his companions, he said, welcome ya humqa. He says, may woe unto you, O fools. Atadrun liman tuqatilun. Do you know who exactly you're fighting? This is a surprising statement coming from someone who opposes the Imam alayhi salam. He says, do you know who you are fighting? إنما تقاتلون فرسان المصر. You are fighting the most bravest of warriors. That's why we are struggling killing them. وأهل البصائر. And they are the ones who have basira. They are the ones who have foresightedness. They are the ones who have insight. Basira comes from the word basar. Basar usually means what? Eyes, the ability to see. Yes? Basair is a person who has foresightedness. He is able to look into the future and make decisions, collective, very meticulous decisions based on the knowledge that he has. So you find that these people, the companions of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, are treated with respect because they are coined as Basair or Ahl al-Basair. Ahl al-Basair is when a person makes very meticulous, very collective decisions, very strong decisions based on the information that they have. It means that a person should never be hastened. A person should never be quick in making decisions. And this is in par with the Islamic understanding of how a person should make decisions or make, for example, choices in his life. That a person should always try and evaluate the information he has and make decisions based on that information. Islam abhors a person who quickly hastens in making decisions. And that's why Abu Abdullah alayhi salam many a times on the day of Ashura delivers many sermons, even days leading towards the day of Ashura, he turns to the people of Umar ibn Sa'ad and he says, Ya ayyuhan nas, isma'u qawli, wa la ta'jalu. Listen to my words and do not hasten. Do not hasten in committing a crime that there is no escape from. When it comes to the adhab, there is no escape from that adhab. He would turn to the people and remind him his position. He would say, am I not the grandson of Rasulullah? Look towards the right and the left. Look towards the east and the west of the world. You will not find a single person like myself. The Imam introduces himself in such a powerful way to remind the people that, look, you are about to perform something. You are about to commit the gravest of crimes, and there is no escape from the adhab of Allah in regards to this crime. Listen to my words. Do not hasten in your actions. And so when we come to this understanding of basira, you find that the religion of Islam emphasizes that each and every one of us should try and adopt and try and have basira within our lives. To be able to work with the information that we have. When the question is raised, how do I make sound collective decisions Islamically? There are two major sources or two major strategies that we should apply. Number one, have or engage in consultation. Number two, istikhara. When you have consulted, when you have weighed the pros and the cons, and you are still unsure with which regards or which areas to go or which act to perform, then leave that matter in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Istikhara is when you seek khair from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You tell Allah, Ya Allah, I am absolutely, utterly in the state of confusion. I do not know whether A or B is good for me. I leave that choice for you. And so you find that the companions of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, they were characterized as those who had basira. They had foresightedness. They had vision. They had insight. Meaning what? Meaning that they had the ability to choose right from wrong. They had the ability to distinguish haqq from batil. What's important is to try and understand that these companions were not those who, for example, knew what is wajib and what is haram. We all know what's wajib and what's haram. Does that mean that we all have basira? No, absolutely not. Knowing that salah is wajib is not that I have basira. Reading the Quran, I know it's good and mustahab. In salah it's wajib, but that doesn't mean that I have basira. Knowing the different laws of the religion of Islam does not show that I have basira. Because you find that even the Khawarij knew. The Khawarij were those who had deep animosity towards Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. The Imam, he commands his sons to bury him in the secrecy of the night. Why? Because the Khawarij were willing to exhume his body and disrespect his body. So the Imam alayhi salam says that the Khawarij are those who recite the best of Quran, they are those who recite Salah, but they are willing to exhume the body of the Imam alayhi salam into respect. So to know superficial or to have superficial knowledge of the religion of Islam doesn't mean that a person has basira. They say Ibn Abbas one day he came towards the Imam alayhi salam and he said to the Imam, he said, I saw people, they had calluses in their palms. They had, for example, calluses on their knees and they had calluses on their foreheads because of the amount of ibadat they would engage with. Their faces were shining like light, they wore very simple clothing. Their tongues were busy in recitation of the Holy Quran. How can these people not have basira? And then the Imam replies, he says, hold on a second, how can the Khawarij do the same? The Khawarij are those, can you come forward and say that the Khawarij are those who have basira as well? Absolutely not. So you find that from this area, Ahl al-Basair, when we say that the companions of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam had insight and foresightedness and they had vision, it means that they were able to think for themselves. That they were able to think, differentiate, submit, find the truth and then submit to that truth. You find, for example, it has come within the traditions, man sami'a wa tafakkara. When a person hears and then he thinks and he ponders. Without making rash decisions, he thinks and he ponders. And then وَنَظَرَ وَأَبْصَرَ. He sees and then he examines greatly with such meticulous detail. He looks deeply into the matter and not just looking at things from a superficial way. وَإِنْتِفَاعٍ بِالْأَبْرِ. Then he ponders, then he thinks. He engages in tadabbur and he engages in tafakkur. He looks towards history. He ponders what happened in history. He reflects on certain historical events. He looks into the dimensions of what happened after the demise of the Holy Prophet. He sees how the people got together in Saqifa and how they chose the leader after Rasulullah, and how that leader chose the leader after him, and how that leader after him chose the leader after him. When we take all of the historical evidences that we have, we ponder upon it and we reflect deeply. Because you find that when we understand what happened in Saqifa, everything falls into place, like the pieces of a puzzle. Because what happened in Saqifa was a direct consequence, was a direct effect of what happened, a cause of what happened in Karbala. Karbala was an effect of what happened in Saqifa. So you find that one area of basira is when a person is able to think, when a person is able to, for example, reflect upon what has happened before in history. When you look at, for example, the Muslims that were there in the time of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, this is very important as per our discussion. Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, when he becomes the leader, he destroys Kufa because of the political support that the Kufans gave to the Imam. It was a threat that he wanted to destroy. So he destroys Kufa. But at the same time, he works with the people of Sham and Syria. What does he do? He begins the la'na of Amir al-Mu'mineen. For a good 90, 95 or 100 years, the Ahl al-Kufa, the Ahl al-Sham, they engage in the la'na of the Imam alayhi salam. And they begin to curse him day in, day out. Every Jum'ah Salah, after praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, engaging in his hamd, they would give la'na to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. To the extent that the people of Sham and the people of Syria grew up thinking that the Imam and the Ahl al-Bayt are far from Rasulullah, that they are away from the message of Rasulullah, that the Banu Umayyah were the closest of companions to Rasulullah. When you have children growing in that community, or in that area, or in that environment, they are programmed to believe that the Ahl al-Bayt are those far from the message of Rasulullah. And that's why the evidence is seen in the time of Imam Hassan. When that Shami approaches Imam Hassan and begins to hurl insults towards the Imam, and he abuses the Imam, he scolds the Imam, he curses the Imam, how does Imam Hassan respond? Imam Hassan alayhi salam says to him, "Oh man, if you are hungry, then come to my house, because I see that you are a traveler. If you have somewhere to stay, if you have somewhere where you are not, if you do not have somewhere to stay, then come to my house and I will look after you. If you, for example, are in need of any services, then come and I will provide those services for you." You find that he begins to look after the Imam alayhi, he looks after the man. The man realizes that, hold on a second, every Jum'ah Salah that I have attended, every person that I meet in Sham, they hurl insults and curse Ali ibn Abi Talib. But the son of Ali ibn Abi Talib is absolutely different. He awakes from his slumber, he realizes the position of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhi salam. When you realize that the whole of Sham and Syria were raised under the guidance of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan to have and develop a hatred and animosity towards the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam, you find that living in this environment, it would have been difficult to show support to the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. But when you turn towards the companions of Abu Abdullah, despite living in the fog of ambiguity, despite living in an arena where there is a lot of propaganda being thrown towards you, they were able to see the truth. They were able to see the light within this fog. They grabbed onto it, they submitted to it, and they showed that submission towards Abu Abdullah alayhi salam on the 10th of Muharram. They were able to distinguish haqq from batil. They were able to see the truth in the cloud of falsehood. And don't think that because we are under the wilayah of Ali ibn Abi Talib, we are safe from that as well. For indeed, we recite in Salah every day, 10 times a day, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, guide us to the right path. Because it is very easy for us to divert ourselves from the right path. When we speak about the companions of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, they were magnificent. They were profound, the likes of Muslim ibn Awsaja, the likes of Burair, the likes of, for example, Habib ibn Madahir. But far greater than the companions were the children on the day of Ashura. The children of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. They too, despite their young age, had basira. You look at, for example, Ali al-Akbar when he says to his Imam, his own father, he says, is death certain? He says to him, my son, do you fear death? He says, no, as long as we are on the right, death I am not afraid of. When you look at Qasim, he comes forward and he says, my uncle, death to me is sweeter than honey. When you look at Awn and Muhammad, the sons of Zainab, and how much support they gave to Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, that is something profound that we need to always appreciate. When you look at the Masa'ib of Zainab, she is known as she is known as al-Masa'ib because of the difficulties and the tribulations and the adversities that she faced in her life. Her first musibah was the passing of her mother when they came towards the door and they attacked her behind the door. And then the musibah which carries on when she witnesses the strike on the head of her father, and then she witnesses the musibah of her brother and how he consumes the poison and how he begins to vomit his own liver. And then now on the 10th of Muharram, when she witnesses the companions taken from her brother Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. They say that the Imam alayhi salam, when he was there and there were no more companions there to support him, Zainab, she turns to her two sons and she gets them prepared. She puts on armors on them. She gives them swords. She then comes towards Abu Abdullah alayhi salam and she says to him, my brother, Yabna Rasulullah, I beg you, give me permission to send my two sons. And then she tells to her sons, she turns to her sons, she tells them, go to Abu Abdullah, beg him that you go and give your lives defending him. But know that he will not give you permission to go. But then Zainab would constantly say to herself, she would say, Ali al-Akbar gave his life for his father Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. How can Zainab live to know that Akbar is gone and her two sons are still alive? What will I say to my mother, Az-Zahra, if my two sons do not go and fight? She would beg Abu Abdullah, let my children fight. Let them go and give their lives for their Mawla. But then the Imam would refuse. The Imam would say, no, they are young. Jihad is not wajib on them. Let them stay with their mother. But then she would say to him, Yabna Rasulullah, when we return to our mother Az-Zahra, how will I approach my mother Az-Zahra? What will I say to her? That I did not let my sons fight for your cause. She gives Awn and Muhammad swords and prepares them for battle. Again she begs and she seeks permission. Abu Abdullah alayhi salam says, perhaps your husband has not allowed you. She says, no, far from it. My husband said to me, Ya Zainab, if war breaks out, then make sure that our sons fight for Abu Abdullah. He said, Ya Zainab, make sure our sons fight before the sons of Hussein. She insists until Abu Abdullah alayhi salam gives her permission to send Awn and Muhammad. When Awn and Muhammad, they enter the battlefield, they say that Awn enters the fight And he calls out, he says, إن تنكروني فأنا ابن جعفر شهيد صدق في الجنان يطير فيها بجناح أخضر كفى بهذا شرفا في المحشر. When Muhammad enters the battlefield, he calls out, أشكو إلى الله من العدوان فعال قوم في الردي إميان فبدلوا معالم القرآن ومحكم التنزيل والتبيان. They say that when they began fighting, whenever Aun would strike his enemy, he would look towards Abu Fadl al-Abbas. And these were trained by Abu Fadl al-Abbas. And they say that when Muhammad would strike his enemy, he would look towards Abu Abdullah. Whenever Aun was in trouble, Muhammad would come and assist them. And whenever Muhammad was in trouble, Aun would come and help. Until Umar ibn Sa'd gives an order and he says, as long as these two children are together, we cannot defeat them. Separate them and slaughter them when you have separated them. Then the army, they come in and they separate Aun from Muhammad. Aun is now alone and Muhammad is now alone. And they began striking Aun and they began striking Muhammad until they began to fall from their horses. They fell from the horses onto the grounds of Karbala. When Aun and Muhammad fell onto the grounds of Karbala, they turned to Abu Abdullah, Ya Amma, Adrikna, Ya Amma. Abu Abdullah alayhi salam alongside Abu Fadl al-Abbas, they hastened towards the battlefield. The Imam alayhi salam embraces his nephews. They leave this world. The narrations tell us that Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, he carries the bodies of these children back to the tents. But he carries them in such a way that their feet drag in the sands of Karbala. When they send them or when they take them towards the tents of the women, all of the women, they gathered outside the tents, wanting to show respect to Aun and Muhammad. But Zainab was nowhere to be seen. Zainab was not there alongside the women. Zainab stayed in her tent. The narrations tell us that Zainab did not shed tears for Aun and Muhammad. Zainab did not cry. In fact, she went into sujood and gave shukr to Allah. They say that Zainab, whenever a companion would be killed, Zainab would always be the first one to show respect towards the companion for how they gave their lives for Abu Abdullah. But when the bodies of Aun and Muhammad came towards the tents, Zainab was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps the historians, they say to us, it was perhaps because Zainab did not want Abu Abdullah to see the grief and the sorrow in her face. Zainab, they say that Zainab is now in Kufa, yet she does not shed tears for Aun and Muhammad. She goes to Sham and she does not shed tears for Aun and Muhammad. Until when? Until she comes back to the homes in Medina, until she comes back to the city of her grandfather Rasulullah. When she enters her home, what does she hear? You tell me what she hears. For those of you who are mothers, for those of you who are fathers, for those of you who are parents, what is the most beautiful things to hear? It is the sounds of your children. It is the cries of your children. It is the laughter of your children. When Zainab enters her home, she hears nothing. She hears silence. There is no laughter and there is no cries. She enters the room of Aun and Muhammad and she hears and she sees the two mattresses, the two empty mattresses in their room. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. Surah al-Mubarakah al-Fatiha. A humble request of Fatiha for all our marhumin, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.